And here we have the brain, because the tissues, those layers, also form the different, what we call brain relays, the different parts of our brain. And I've got 4 in this diagram. It's obviously a very simplified diagram of the brain. There's actually a 5th layer, which we'll come on to later. But you can see again, the 3 germ layers are reflected in the brain and its different relays. So starting at the endoderm, we've got the brain stem, and that's the kind of the oldest part, the first part of our brain that appeared in the evolutionary cycle journey process, sometimes referred to as the lizard brain. So that's our very basic part of our brain, and each of these relays within the brain has its own kind of theme and what it looks after in our lives. And for the brain stem, that is survival, because that's our very first basic thing that we need to do. We need to survive, we need to live. And in order to do that, and not just ourselves to live, but to then procreate and have future generations, for that to happen, we need to be able to eat, we need to be able to reproduce, we need to be able to digest, we need to be able to excrete, and all of the functions that are related to those processes. And those come under the brain stem. Then the mesoderm, we can divide that into 2. It's the old mesoderm, and from that we get the cerebellum. The cerebellum comes from those old mesoderm cells. And then there are parts of the body that are developing at the same time as that cerebellum, and they come under that relay. As with the brain stem, there are parts, tissues, organs that are developing at the same time as the brain stem. The eating, digesting, excreting, reproductive parts of our body are developing alongside the brain stem. The cerebellum, that its theme is about protection. So it's protective tissues that develop at the same time as the cerebellum. And I like to think of that as like the sacs. So the sacs in which our lungs are held and protected and encased like an envelope. You would put a letter in an envelope to keep the letter clean and safe, and our lungs are within their envelope to keep them safe as well, to protect them. The heart has the pericardium. The gut organs have an envelope around them. So we have various different tissues in our body that are developing alongside the cerebellum. Our dermis is another one, so the under layer of our skin. That's another one that comes under the cerebellum. The new mesoderm forms the cerebral medulla and also our musculoskeletal system, our bones, our muscles, tendons, ligaments, those connective tissues. And their theme, if you think about what our skeleton, our muscles do for us, they're about structure and about movement and how we move and about our ability to move. And which way we can move. The elbow bends that way, it doesn't bend the other way. And our head moves differently, our shoulder and our hip is a ball and socket joint, our knee is a different kind of joint again. And so it's all about that movement, that structure, how we move, how we can move, and how maybe we feel we can't do things. I'm not strong enough, I'm not able to. Those sorts of concepts come under that brain relay. The mesoderm, new mesoderm layer is the cerebral medulla and those tissues within our body. And that theme, the can, can't, movement, structure, stability, strength, standing up tall, all of those things. Then the next layer up, the last one, is the ectoderm, which is kind of like the outer layer here on the brain, the cortex. And this is about how we take in information about the world, our senses, touch, sight, smell, hearing, taste. All of these senses are processed by the cerebellum. And that obviously relates to skin, to our eyes, to our nose, and different tissues within those parts of our body, and they come under the cerebral cortex. And then each of those tissues has its own function. Everything within the healing process serves a purpose. It has a function. In the stress phase, our body is responding to something it feels is threatening, overwhelming, pushes us into one of the stress responses. And in my book, I talk about 7, though apparently there are 10. So things like fight, flight, freeze, flop, fawn, fix. I can't think what the other 7th one is in my book. Fidget. So those are the 7 responses that I talk about in my book, the 7 Fs. And when our body is in one of those stress responses, that's in that stress phase, the red part of the diagram that I showed at the beginning. And here the body is responding. It's doing something to support us because there is some kind of a pressure or a threat or a sense of overwhelm that we are feeling. Again, it's very much our individual perception, but we're feeling that and our body is taking action to help us. So it might be growing more cells to help us do that thing more effectively. For example, digestion. Or it might be that the function is increased. Like, for example, the retina, so that we can see better. We can see more clearly to help us in that fight or flight, so that we can see a way out, we can see our escape route. So it can be see the way out metaphorically and literally, because our bodies can work very metaphorically as well. And each of the themes will be reflected in our perception, our understanding, and therefore in where they present in our body and in how our body responds. And equally then they'll be reflected in the regeneration and the symptoms that we experience. And I've said in the other videos that the symptoms we often say or think of as dis-ease, they're actually signs that the body is working its way back to healing, working its way back to well-being, to homeostasis, to balance, because in order to be in balance, it needs to undo the changes that it did in stress phase, because that shifts us into more function, more activity. And so it needs to take us back down to our base level, to our balance, to that homeostasis. And so it's releasing, it's getting rid. If it's put on extra cells, if it's grown extra cells in the stress phase, it needs to remove those. They're surplus to requirements now. To get back to the baseline, it needs to remove those. And I'll talk a little bit about that in some of the healing peaks that are coming up in a minute. But that's basically what's going on. So when we can listen to our body and when we can understand what's happening, then it takes away a lot of that fear and that worry, which can just add layers of stress onto what's already been a challenging situation. And it can actually, as I talk about in the chronic dis-ease videos, push us back into stress. So if we have self-talk and thoughts that what's wrong with me, why is this happening, which I know I very much did when I had eczema and ME as well. I would think, why have I no energy? Why can I not do things? Why am I not able to be active in the way that my friends and my peers are? Why am I so just listless and lethargic? Or why does my gut not tolerate certain foods? What's wrong with me? Why am I different? Why is this happening to me? Some of these phrases you might have said yourself or heard other people saying. When I had eczema, it was, why is my skin flaring up? But that self-talk was perpetuating my illness, perpetuating my stress, just keeping me going round and round and round in that loop, that stress loop, and never allowing my body to get fully through the healing and regeneration. And I talk about how the eczema, when it's red and it's inflamed, that's actually in the healing phase. But I would look, because it was on my hands, so it was very visible, I would look at my hands and think, they're ugly, they're horrible, why are they doing this to me? Why is my skin attacking itself? That's the kind of, if you think of eczema as maybe coming under one of the autoimmune conditions, why is this happening? But now that I've learned this, I understand that's my skin healing. Like in a cut, if you cut your skin, then when it's healing, it's red, it's inflamed, it's often swollen, even just a little bit. It then gets itchy. That's the same as eczema. You get all those symptoms. But in a cut, we know it's healing. And yet in eczema, we think I'm having a flare up, something going wrong. But it isn't. It's just another example of the skin healing, just as with a cut. It's the body doing its natural processes that it's designed to do. And when we can understand that, it takes away that extra layer of stress and worry that will actually just make us feel worse and possibly prolong the healing process, mean that we don't get through it quite so quickly. So we can go into a chronic state, or it takes us longer to heal.